Hello and welcome back to Retfurb. So on today's video I've got this McBasil PS1, PS2 HDMI adapter. I think that's how you pronounce it, McBasil. And I'm going to be showing exactly what it does for the PS1. So you basically use it to convert the normal output on the PS1 into a HDMI output. But I'm going to be doing it a slight difference. So I'm going to try to actually incorporate it inside of the PS1. So if I show you what it does. So ordinarily it plugs into the back like that. And then you've got the small USB port there, which you've got a cable which it comes with, which then powers it up. And then you've got the HDMI output on the back of there, which then goes into the back of the TV. So it's a really good way of connecting the PS1 console up to a modern TV if you don't have any of the older input types. So yeah, what I want to do instead though is instead of plugging it on the back, so you've got all these extra wires and everything on the back of it, I want to try and incorporate it inside somewhere. So that's the aim of the video today, is try and get this fitted inside here. I'm now going to remove all these wires so you don't have all that flapping around, and then I have to get a 5-volt power source from inside the console to power this. So yeah, hopefully we can get that working okay. Now on its own, it does work really well, really good quality. I would say for the price, it was £15 when I bought it a couple of days ago from Amazon. And I thought I'd give it a go. I was looking at another adapter which was rated highly, which I was going to do, but they didn't have it in stock and that was a lot more expensive than this. So I thought I'd just give it a go, see what it's like. It's only £15, so it's not too bad. And yeah, I was quite impressed with what it looked like. You know, it's not perfect, but it is good and it's worth doing the modification to try and put it inside. So let's get straight into it. Getting straight into it then, the first thing I need to do is get the circuit board out of the actual case on the HDMI adapter. Now it was sealed pretty well on this, so you can see I was trying to do it on my nails but I couldn't quite get in there, so I managed to prise a screwdriver in the side. Now obviously when you're doing this you want to be careful you don't slip it right inside, that it will damage the circuit board. You need to make sure that you're just separating those plastic outer shell parts. So you can see it's come apart now. Now with this HDMI adapter, it's got buttons on there where you can change it from 16.9 to 4.3 ratio and also 720 by 1080p. Now obviously the ratio will change how it displays on the actual screen on the TV. There's a lot of TVs where you can actually change the display with the buttons on the TV rather than using that. So what I did is I set it how I wanted it. I wanted it to show in 4.3, so I set it as that before I took it apart. And also with the 720 and the 1080 setting, to be honest, I didn't see a lot of difference in that. So I just put it on what looked the best, left it as that, because I thought once it's inside the console, it's not going to be changed again. So anyway, moving on from that, you can see I'm inside of the console now. I'm just stripping it down, getting access to the circuit board, just removing the protective shell that's on the inside. I removed the optical drive, which I don't actually use on this system because I've got the PSIO. And just as a note, while I'm doing this, that will come into play in a little while. Once I get further on with the mod, the location of where I actually put the mod to is not ideal for the PSIO and I end up having to move it, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. First of all, we'll show exactly how I did the mod and connected it up. So I put it inside the system, and then the location can be changed. You know, you can put it where you want really, as long as it's not interfering with anything else in there. Anyway, waffling on a bit there. Going back to this, I'm now just working out which wire goes to what on the pinout on the circuit board so I can solder directly to it. So I've just plugged in the cable off of the HDMI adapter and I'm just using a multimeter just to check to see which wires go to what on the board. And I'm just using a small little diagram that as I'm doing it, I'm writing it down on there, which wire goes to what. And I will show this diagram. I'll put a picture of it. I've set it up on the computer and I'll put a picture of it so you can stop it and use it if you need to. The only thing I would say is, obviously with some of these type of components, you might find that the wires are different. The colours, they should be the same, but just be mindful of that. You know, if you're going to solder it all in, you want to make sure you're doing it right. So it might be worth just doing this yourself anyway. making a small little diagram on the side. You can see I'm going over all the wires a couple of times, just making sure that there's no sort of bridges between any of the wires, and they're all separate on there, which they should be, but I'm just making sure of that. And that's it. I've checked where all the wires go. So you can pause it here and use this diagram. If you're using the same HDMI McBasil unit, then the wires should be the same, but I would just double check them. So now I'm just trying to work out in my head where I'm going to put this HDMI adapter. Now, initially, this is where I thought, this would be ideal. Perfect placement. I can slot it in there, it'll be out of the way. Once I've got the hinge out of the way, I can get in there nicely, but you'll soon see that's not the case. But yeah, I'm just trying to find the 5-volt location now for the HDMI. It needs to be powered up via 5-volt USB, so obviously we've got to get this from inside the console. So the pin that the 5-volt needs to go to is where I'm pointing to now. So that is where you need to solder the 5-volt from the console into that part. And now I'm just prepping the wire to solder that into the main circuit board. Now obviously you can see I'm cutting this with a blade. You need to be very careful. You don't want to go all the way through and end up ripping through the wires. Obviously you've got a bit of wire in there that you can play with, so it doesn't matter too much, but I've tried to do it, so I'm going to keep this plug on one end so I can plug that into the adapter, and it makes it easier when you're taking it in and out. If you're sort of stripping it down again to do anything else on the console, it's always worth trying to keep those plugs in there. It makes it a lot easier. As long as you've got it on one end, you can unplug that, and then the wire stays with the main circuit board. And now I'm just prepping those pins for soldering the wires to. I'm just adding a slight amount of solder to the pins that I'm going to be soldering to, just to make it a little bit better for the wires to connect up to. Obviously you don't want to go too mad and put too much on there. And also I've been over the ends of the wires and I've prepped them, and I've put a little bit of solder on the end of them as well. And just carefully working your way through, following the diagram that you've done for the colours, and just soldering them onto the board, making sure that they're not bridging in any way. So luckily with this part of the soldering, it's not too intricate. It's quite easy to do, really, I would say. If you've got basic soldering skills, it's fairly easy. You just need to make sure you're not bridging any wires when you're doing it. So you can check that afterwards anyway, the multimeter, which you'll see me do in a minute. I just go over and just check all those connections, make sure there's nothing that's bridging out between them. And just trying to route those wires a little bit. So when I did this, I didn't really think about too much where it was going to go. I just thought I can slot it at the top. And you just need to be careful when you're doing that. Obviously the shield that goes around the circuit board, make sure that that's not catching it in any way. And obviously you don't want to put the wires anywhere near the hole where it bolts through either. And just using some tape just to secure that in place, so it doesn't move around too much when I'm slotting it in and out. So you can see there that the wire's coming out from the right hand side on the screen, and just making sure that you're not catching it on any of the shell when you're doing that. So now this is what I was thinking was the best location. I didn't think about using the PSIO with this, which obviously in that location you wouldn't be able to use it with the PSIO, so you need to be mindful of that. Once you've watched the process of this, you'll see later on in the video that I actually move it and put it as central, which really I should have done in the first place. It's a lot better position, but I carry on and show this just in case you weren't using it with a PSIO. You can put it here. It's out of the way, and it's like I say, it's an ideal location to put it if you don't have a PSIO, because it's tucked up at the top of the console. So now I'm just marking out where the HDMI is going to come out. So this was a little bit tricky trying to get this 100% accurate while I was doing it. I was trying to measure from the inside and outside, and it was a little bit tricky. Now this isn't the most tidiest of cuttings on the shell. What I was sort of thinking with doing it is that I was going to use this shell as a bit of a trial run. just to, you know, see where I need to do it and then get another shell and do it nicely, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm just using this as a guide really to do, you know, it's the first time I've done it, the modification. It was a little bit of a you know, trial and error really with it, and yeah, like I say, it's it came out okay. It's not perfect, the cutting, but it is all right. And just keep trying it, keep trimming little bits. Obviously try not to trim too much out that is going to affect any of the other parts in the PlayStation. I'm trying to keep it as an original as possible, you know, looking. And now the way I found mounting this in this location was using double-sided tape. Now I ended up having to layer it up about 3 or 4 times to fit it in that location, which was not ideal, but it held it in place. And then yeah, it sort of held it straight then. Before, I couldn't get it to sit nicely with the hole. It was sitting at a bit of an angle. But the double-sided tape should hold it well. And then what I did afterwards with this, I ended up fixing a couple of bits round it to stop it from moving so much, and you'll see that in a minute. I'm just trimming the hinge now to go back on to stop that from hitting the little circuit board that's put in. At this point, the buttons on the actual HDMI controller were slightly in the way of where the hinge was, so I just had to trim that a little bit off, and then it stopped that from hitting those buttons. And now I'm just fitting a small little black plastic bit. Now this was off the original shell of the HDMI mod. I just cut a little bit off and just glued it at the end to stop it, so when you push that HDMI lead in the HDMI circuit board, it doesn't move too much. It didn't move a lot, but with the layers of foam, double-sided tape foam, it moved a little bit, and I didn't want it to keep moving and then potentially get pushed off. And that's it, located, and it's held in place now. So now I'm just putting a small bit of solder on the location for the 5 volt. Now I've got a solid lead here which I solder onto the circuit board in that location, and then I solder it on the other circuit board, the main circuit board for the PS1. Now I changed this afterwards and you'll see it shortly. I ended up getting a wire with a small plug on it so I could disconnect one side to the other, so it wasn't always connected. Like I said before, if you're working on the PlayStation, you're taking bits on and off, you want to, you know, be able to disconnect things. So there, I'm just pointing out that's the location where the 5 volt is on this component. So you can see here I'm just soldering that in place. And now I'm having to trim the shell that goes above the circuit board, because where the wire comes out it wouldn't go in correctly, so I'm having to trim that. So I trim that off, I sand it to get rid of any sharp edges and put some paint over the top of it to prevent any sort of corrosion or anything. Not that it should do in this, but yeah, I just tidied it up basically and made it so it wasn't sharp, that it wouldn't catch on any wires. So you can see at this point now I've swapped the wire over for the 5 volt, and now it's got a small plug on it. So it makes it a lot easier when you come to take the top part of the shell off, and you can separate it nice and easy because you've got the plugs on both parts of the wiring that's been done. Now this was the main issue that I came across when now at this point was getting the wire routed round in the right location so it wouldn't get in the way when you're closing the console back up. After doing the work, I just tried to route the wire around the right way. Now it took me a couple of attempts to try and get it in the right way so it wouldn't catch and get in the way when you close the case, and you'll see in a minute that I actually move it again because it wasn't shutting correctly. So yeah, now I routed it around that way. But like I say, this is the original location that I fitted it there, and then it is this point that I realised, and you can see I've moved it in the middle, which actually, to be honest, I think is better location. You can see there it looks a lot tidier. I've marked out, this is where I had to cut the metal on the actual cover that goes over the main circuit board, and then I had to chop off the top of the button on the small circuit board for the HDMI circuit. And yeah, it sits in nicely there. The only thing with the shell, it needs to be made nicer again. Like I said, there's a bit of a trial and error on this, and when you look at it, there's a little bit of a hole underneath. So yeah, this is obviously the PSIO, and if you fit that on there, then you can't get the HDMI in. So that needs to be, yeah, you need to be mindful of that. So yeah, that's basically the mod done, and now we'll just show it working. Now overall, it's pretty good, to be honest. The HDMI itself, I think, looks, I wouldn't say loads better than the original output, like the composite output, but I would say it's definitely an improvement. I haven't looked at any other HDMI mods out there, but looking at this, I'm pretty happy with it. There is a couple of little things you notice with it, a couple of little flashy bits you can see there on the bottom right. Occasionally you get that on the screen, but when you're playing the actual game, there's no issues at all. Now I'm using a cheap HDMI capture device here, so the quality doesn't look quite as good on here. But yeah, when you're playing it, there's no sort of issues. But I would say definitely in person, when you compare the original lead to this, it does look better. It's, yeah, definitely worth doing for the price that it costs at time. I think it was £15 I paid for the actual HDMI McBasil adapter. And then if you had a little bit in for bits and pieces, it's not a lot. Even under £20, I would say you'd do it. And yeah, it's definitely a lot easier to connect to more modern TVs than using any of the old connections. And I definitely think the quality is made better with it. Another thing I noticed, when you load up like a disc and you get or you turn the PlayStation on without the PSIO connected, you sometimes get a bit of a blue screen at the start, and then it catches up and it shows the PlayStation logo as it's loading up. So you do get a couple of weird things like that, which is not unknown for HDMI adapters. But overall, yeah, I'd say it's really good. Definitely recommend it. If you can do a bit of soldering and you don't mind going in and doing this mod, definitely say it's worth doing. I'm really happy with it. I'm glad I did it, and I'm planning to do it on another console as well. So yeah, that's it. Not a lot else I can say really. If you've got any questions, or you need to know any more about it, or you want to see any more, hopefully I've showed it as best as I can. Yeah, if you need to know anything else, let me know. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. It's really appreciated. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.